How's it going, people? Welcome back to United View and welcome back to another Tactical View. It's been a while since the last time, but myself and Charlie are here and we have got a brand new manager to analyse. Erik ten Hag has finally gone after months of what it felt like, quite frankly, was the same performance every single week. I know when we were recording these shows, Charlie, it was pretty much the same exact show every single week. Playing donut formation, nothing in midfield. Players couldn't keep the ball, too much running involved, which sounds still a bit of a strange thing to say about a professional football team. But anyway, it was the same thing every week. And then we had months of not doing the tactical view because, well, it was the same thing every week. And finally, we have survived the Erik ten Hag era and he's been replaced by Ruben Amorim. So, first things first, how are you? What do you think of the appointment of Ruben Amorim? And what can we expect about from Ruben Amorim?
No, I'm all good. Thanks for having me on again, mate. I hope you're all well. And yeah, it's good to be back in different circumstances, maybe a more positive show than ones that we've done before. Um, what can we expect from Ruben Amorim? I think from what we've seen so far, I think from everybody really, all the supporters have probably seen there's quite a lot of personality, quite a lot of charm in the way he goes about things. You've seen the way he's handled sort of some press conferences he's done out in Portugal before the Man City game, and then in his interview as well, you could really see that sort of charm, that he's got that charisma, which is something you definitely need as manager of Manchester United. And then in terms of his football team, I think we've seen throughout his whole career, really, particularly at Sporting, it's a very, very intense team, a lot of energy. It's quite direct, probably not quite as direct as Erik ten Hag's team was, which is probably a good thing for us. But I think we can be excited about sort of the speed at which the team plays. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it, and I think we've got some players that really look suited for this Amorim system. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Yes, and for sure. And I think with all of these changes, there's always going to be winners and losers in the squad. And we're going to take a look at some of that later. I think obviously there's some of the obvious players that a lot of people are projecting to do well and really come alive under this new system. There's some other situations where maybe some of the big guys, the big players in the team, might actually struggle to get themselves in the first 11. So there's a few issues there potentially, and also there's a few of the youngsters that might find themselves, as tends to happen when you get a new manager, making themselves an instant favourite. And I think obviously in the way Amorim's done his business previously, he's obviously placed a lot of trust in young players, and it's something that obviously at Manchester United is one of the most important characters or characteristics of a manager. So I think that's another area to look out for, and I think there's. I've definitely got a couple of surprise names in mind of people that I think are going to really take off under the new manager. And I'm sure you do as well, Charlie. But without any further ado, let's start to think about the in possession side of things. So I think we'll take a little bit of look at a more detailed look at what we get in possession, out of possession, and then a little bit more focus on specifically who's going to play, why they're going to play, and what they're going to bring to the team. So in possession, what can we expect from Amorim? I know a lot's been made of the 3-4-3, but talk to me a bit more about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's. I think there was a bit of an unfair. I think there's a bit of an unfair sort of labeling of a 3-4-3 that people tend to think, oh, it's a very, very defensive formation. But I actually think it's one of the most. It could be one of the most exciting sort of formations to see sort of play out, and we've seen that throughout history, really. Um, and I think with Amorim's 3-4-3, and I think he mentioned this himself. People get a little bit too fixated on the fact that there's three centre backs, there's two wing backs, so effectively people might think, oh, it's five defenders, but actually Ruben Amorim has tend to use sort of at least one winger in one of those wing back positions. So it can actually be used to sort of unlock sort of attacking potential. So in possession, I think from what I've noticed, I don't know whether you concur as well, but what I've noticed is that Sporting don't tend to go long initially from the goal kick. So the goalkeeper will play out, and what we see quite often is when they do play out from the goal kick, the middle centre back out of the three goes into the midfield pivot. So he goes alongside one of the midfield players, and then one of the other midfield players pushes forward, and it creates this sort of 4-2 shape we often see, or 2-4 shape, however you like, in build up with the goalkeeper included as well. And what they try and do from build up is they'll initially try and play it short. They'll try and get the ball to one of the wider centre backs, and they won't really mess around like some other teams do in terms of sort of trying to play through the press, intricate passes, 5, 6, 7, 8 passes. What they try and do is they try and entice the pressure initially, and they'll try and use that to sort of play long into one of the inside forwards or number 10 positions. And we see sort of normally at least one of those number 10s sort of dropping deep and offering that option. And we've seen a lot for Sporting. Trincao, who played, obviously, he's played in the Premier League for Wolves. We've seen him sort of a little bit reborn under Ruben Amorim, playing in one of those number 10 positions. And we see him quite a lot receiving back to goal, using his a quick turn of pace to sort of evade pressure and then play a ball down the channel, for instance, into Victor Gyökeres, who I'm sure we'll talk about. So I'd say sort of in build-up areas, something I've noticed is not too much sort of intricate passing through the lines. Get it to one of the ball-playing centre-backs. Play quite a direct ball into those number 10s. Can we turn and can we feed into the channels? But we've seen quite a variety of different shapes that sort of make up that. We've seen really quite a lot of flexibility and adaptability, which is quite nice to see. But I don't know how you think about that. Maybe put a question to you about the build-up, because we saw a lot under Erik ten Hag, maybe not so many repeated patterns during build-up. He sort of allowed more freedom to his defensive players to sort of find those solutions. I don't know whether you think maybe Amorim offering maybe a bit more repetition would maybe help a lot of our ball players that are maybe not initially the best, because we've seen players like Lisandro Martinez, Luke Shaw, Diogo Dalot can find those solutions, but a lot of our other players don't tend to be able to do that. So I don't know what you think about, in general, that mix between rigidity, fluidity, freedom versus rigidity in build-up, and how you think we might sort of use that under Amorim.
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting question about the impacts of fluidity and sort of what it requires from the players. But I think the main difference we've got is that at the moment, the United squad isn't good enough to build up through the middle of the pitch. I think even if you put the most technical players on the pitch, and that's your Christian Eriksen's, probably Bruno, Kobe Mainu, you could argue maybe Mason Mount somewhere in the middle of the pitch. Even if you do that, United still aren't incredible at building up through the centre. I think there's a massive shortfall in technical ability in that area of the pitch. And so what that means is United have to build up a bit wider. Now, if you're a defending team, it's really easy to set up against, because you just force them one way, collapse across the pitch, and hope you can win the ball back. Now, with Ten Hag playing generally a 4-3-3, what you tended to find was you've got a fullback and a winger on either side. So you've only really got two players down the sides of the pitch. Numbers wise, obviously that's not a load. Versus obviously the 3-4-3, keeping it really, really simple numerically. Got the wide centre back, you've got the wing back, and you've got the sort of inside forward or the 10 on either side, and you're obviously sacrificing numbers in the centre as a result. So, in pure sort of numerical terms, from the perspective that United aren't great down the centre of the pitch and are probably better in the wider areas, for me, I think the change of formation probably helps United's players, because it puts more players in the positions that they're probably a little bit better at, and allows United to play more football in those areas as well. So I think from that perspective, even just the change of shape, if nothing changed tactically in terms of principles, I think that will benefit United. But also, of course, I think when players aren't as capable of sort of interpreting and finding the way out of situations, I think a bit more structure around it helps. And you can see from obviously the training video that I think we're going to talk about in due course that Amorim's already bringing that in and bringing in some clear ideas of, if this happens, then do this, or if you receive the ball here, you're going to want to play off your back foot and play forwards. If you get it in here, probably you're bouncing it back to your centre backs. All those different ideas are starting to come in, and it does look a lot more structured already. Can't say I love the Instagram stories from Rashford and Casemiro. I think it's just a bit unnecessary. I think I get the point. Obviously, you're excited, new manager and all of that, but there's no need to be throwing. It comes across as not great towards the previous regime, which I don't think is a good look for the players themselves. But anyway, so obviously, I know you're talking about build-up shapes. Let's put some players on the pitch here, so we can start to talk about what that might look like and the different things we're going to see. So I put Anara in goal, because I think pretty much that's an obvious one, isn't it? That's going to happen. In terms of the back three, centre backs wise, this is if everyone's fit to start with. Who do you think makes up that back three?
Well, we go on the same debate again about Luke Shaw, don't we? I think something that's interesting that we've seen already is that Luke Shaw has played. I know it's only a training video, but Luke Shaw and Malacia both in training, and Malacia's been given the left wing back sort of position, and Luke Shaw's been given the left centre back, and I think that makes sense because you could probably draw from your coaching experience as well. But when you've got a player that is more injury prone, and you look at Luke Shaw now, we know that Luke Shaw can make those brilliant bursts forward. And he has got actually a very, very good engine, in all fairness, in Luke Shaw. But if you've got a more injury prone player in Luke Shaw and you want to protect him a bit more, I think having him at left centre back instead of left wing back is probably quite a clever move running forward. So I'd probably, if he is fit, which is quite doubtful, but I'd probably have Luke Shaw in that sort of left centre back. And then I think this is a bit of a challenging one for me around Lisandro Martinez because in possession, I think the way that Amorim uses Ousmane Diamonde, I think Lisandro Martinez could really, really suit that role in terms of on goal kicks, going into midfield and using his sort of his shorter frame as such to sort of wriggle out of tight situations and get United up the pitch. But then out of possession, you look at it and you think, well, I'm sure we'll come on to this. Do you want somebody like Lisandro Martinez as the middle centre back defending aerial duels in the box, being that centre man? But we'll come on to that later. And then right centre back, I think if he's fit, I think I'd have Lenny Yoro probably as the right centre back. I think in terms of his personal development, I think you've always got to look at, individually and collectively. And I think individually, in terms of how he can develop as a player, I think playing as a wide centre back in a three is a really, really good area for a young player a really good position for a young player to develop in, because you don't only work on your channel defending against top Premier League wingers and top Premier League players when the wing back goes forward and leaves that space in behind, but you also work on your ball playing, so you can try and find those passes into the half spaces. So I think those are two areas. Lenny Yoro is not bad in either of those areas, channel defending and ball playing, but he could certainly improve. And I think that's an area we could see him sort of improving. But I don't know what you think about sort of Martinez, I think in possession in there, but also looking at players like De Ligt, Maguire. We've also got Lindelof, we've got Evans. I don't know whether you would argue any of those in possession to replace any of those three we've got there.
Yeah, for me, I think the central one has to be De Ligt especially for the start of the Amorim era. I'd be very surprised if it wasn't, and the reason for that is that I think out of possession, particularly in the Premier League, I think one of the things that's going to happen a lot early on is when we're pressing, I think the left wing back or right wing back might get sort of baited high up the pitch quite a lot, which means obviously then these guys are coming across, and it means that this central centre back has got a big channel to defend against one, if not two strikers. Now, the ball that you're going to see is if Shaw can't quite get out quick enough, that ball comes in there. There's a real danger where obviously this centre back's got to go across quickly. If the ball drops over their head, it's a lot to do at the back post for Yoro if there's a couple of players there. So I think just having somebody who's a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more physical, a little bit bigger, just to clear the ball aerially is massive in the Premier League because of the number of those sorts of balls that you see get played into the channels. Now it's probably not as many as it was a few years ago, but I think it's so important that this player is able to get into the channels and defend, head the ball clear, and be ultra physical. Now I get the point about Martinez. And going into midfield and wriggling out tight situations. He is brilliant at it. But for me, I just think in terms of the out of possession stuff, which is obviously really important, I think fundamentally to win games of football, you've got to be brilliant in both boxes. And I think De Ligt's better at that than Martinez for me. And so I put Martinez on the left to start with. I know he's not as good defending the channels, the wider spaces and big spaces as Luke Shaw probably is, because he just doesn't have that pace, quite simply. But I think he's too good to leave out the team in with what he can do with the ball. But for what they can do without the ball, I think you have to have De Ligt in there. So for me, it would be Martinez on the left, De Ligt in the middle, and then I think, you're spot on with Lenny Yoro on the right for me. I think that's... the kid looks fantastic, but I've got to say, I think Lindelof on the right of a three, I don't hate it. Likewise, Maguire in the middle of a three, him and De Ligt rotating are pretty good options to have as a Premier League central centre back in terms of getting on the ball a little bit, but mostly just heading stuff and winning physical duels. They're both pretty good at that and they're going to do a good job. And Johnny Evans is pretty versatile, can probably play across all three of those positions. So I think actually although individually we don't necessarily love any of the centre backs, well, the likes of Lindelof and Evans and Maguire in particular, but I think they can all come in here and do a job because they get a bit more protection in a three, particularly if they're playing in the middle.
Yep. No, I agree with you. I agree with you on that.
So moving on to wing backs, then, if you're having Shaw as left centre back, you put Malacia left wing back, I'm guessing, or
Okay,
would
this
you
is.
put Shaw left wing back and
I think
move
this is
things
a
around?
tricky one. I think this is a tricky one. I think it's important to note that on the right hand side, Amorim's tended to use sort of a wrong-footed wing back.
Yeah,
So that draws up a bit of a conundrum because most people might think Dallo, Mazraoui, etc. But obviously, he hasn't really got all the tools that he might require at this moment in time. So I think Amorim's going to come in and we've obviously seen him use wingers in those wing-back areas, but he might come in and think, hang on a minute, this is the Premier League. I've seen even like the likes of Pep have come to the Premier League and thought, oh, wow, I can't quite do what I want to do here. We've seen the tactical evolution recently of Arteta, Pep using centre-backs at full-back, that it's football's really, really changed tactically in terms of those full-backs slash wing-back positions. So initially, he may go for Malacia at left wing back, and he may go for Dallo or Mazraoui at right wing back. But I think eventually, I think Alejandro Garnacho could be an option on that left at that left wing back position. I think he's got a way to go in terms of developing into one, but I think he is definitely an option there. And on the right hand side, you've got Dallo. I would agree with you. I think Dallo might not have the greatest final third output, but he's got a much better engine than Mazraoui's got, and I think that's the difference for me. I think that's particularly as well with Mazraoui's how injury prone he's been in the past, and he's suffered with quite a lot of different conditions. I don't see him as maybe a long-term option at right wing back. I think he can perfectly slot in there now and again, but I think Dallo, with how reliable he's been consistently playing, I think it's like 44 games in a row or something ridiculous. I think he's a better option there, particularly short term.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think your summary's spot on there on the right side. I think the other reason I haven't got Mazraoui on there is because Mazraoui is actually not in this, not in the in the app at the moment. So that's the other thing that played into my decision there. But yeah, I think you're spot on in terms of durability, in terms of engine. I'm not sure if I agree on Garnacho. I just don't. I don't see that working long term. I think it takes too much away from his game, and although he can do it work rate wise, I think he's still really, really lightweight. Um, I also still think he's got a lot of development to do as a forward player. I think he can get better in that role as well. So, yeah, I'm not convinced by him as a wing back, but I see the idea and see where it's coming from. In terms of, I know people will be in the comments saying this. Have you seen the training video with Anthony at right wing back? Yes, I have. Yes, Charlie's seen it. My take, and we'll get yours in a second, Charlie. I personally think it's just a case of you've got, I don't know, 10 or 11 first team players that aren't aware of international duty. If you're going to train patterns and practice it, you're going to make sure every single one of them's on the pitch, and Anthony's not getting in the front three. In the same way, if you're going to put Luke Shaw on left wing back, you're not going to put Malacia at left centre back. So for me, it's just a case of getting everyone on the pitch, getting everyone playing, and that's why those players are in those positions. I think the wrong-footed wing back thing can work in certain situations, but I think I agree with you in the sense that in the Premier League, you want to be just a little bit more secure in transitions to start with, and then you can start to build and try other things. So I'd be very surprised if he didn't go with Dallo or Mazraoui on the right.
Yeah, I think the Anthony thing, in terms of his intensity, I think it makes. I see people's sort of justification for having Anthony at right wing back, but I think that one thing I will say is that particularly the right wing back we've seen in recent months with Amorim, that player needs to be really, really good 1v1, and they need to be able to get quite a lot of good separation away from the opposition fullback, for instance. And I just don't think Anthony does that enough. But one thing I would say is one of Ruben Amorim's biggest sort of ways of creating chances is they do a particular move that we've seen quite a lot of United, whereby they get the ball out to it used to be our fullback, but it's be our wing back now. The ball goes out to the wing back, and it's if they're on the right hand side, they're left footed. They'll play a first time left footed pass in behind,
Um, and they'll just try and obviously the opposition can sort of sense it coming, so they'll just push up and try and play offside. But you see often at least two, if not three, Sporting players making that run in behind, sort of one um, in between fullback and centre back, one in between the two centre backs, and then one in between the other side of the centre back and fullback. So you've got like two or three players making that running behind, and we've seen that quite often under Ten Hag. And I do
Yeah,
think maybe Dallow's left foot. He has got a very good left foot, in all fairness, Dallow. So we
yeah.
could see that happen with Dallow. But I think that's an important thing to note as well with that wrong-footed wing back. That's quite a good way of creating chances for Amorim.
For sure, yeah. So moving on to midfield then, who do you think would start in there? I think obviously in terms of the demands of the position for Amorim, there's only two midfielders versus the three we've been playing with previously. There's a hell of a lot to do defensively, so that probably rules out some of our options, right?
Yeah, I think it'll be initially. I think we'll see Agati and Mainu. I think would be probably the two that I would choose. I think that pivot does lack a lot, and this is why I was slightly against Agati in the summer. But I think with the back three behind, I think it changes things a little bit more because I think it reduces the need for aerial, really, really aerially dominant player in there a little bit more. So I don't know whether you think and Casemiro, Ericsson, do you think Mount, Bruno, do you think there's any of those options could go in there as well?
I honestly don't see it. I think there's a certain amount of defensive security needed and also just sheer intensity out of possession. And you've got to be pretty focused on the out of possession stuff. So I'd be surprised. I'd be very surprised if that doesn't end up being the midfield going forward. I think Casemiro might get a couple of chances, but I think it'll become very clear to Amram very quickly that he just doesn't have the legs for it anymore. Likewise, he might find that Ericsson in training is brilliant with the ball, but again, legs-wise, really struggling. Now, for me, one area where somebody unexpected, I think, is going to step up is midfield. And this is somebody that I was very vocal about not being good enough and not ready to step up under Eric Ten Hag because I don't think he was anywhere near good enough with the ball. And the out of possession stuff didn't really offset it. But for me, I think this man here, Toby Collier, I can see him in time stepping up and becoming a really important cog in the system. I don't think it's going to be immediate because he's still got a hell of a lot of development to do and a lot of improvement, particularly with the ball, because I just don't think he reads the game quick enough yet when he's got the ball. And I don't think he can quite get himself out of tight situations the way he'd want to be able to. But in time, this guy covers so much ground, as we saw during pre-season and people were constantly talking about. In terms of duels, very, very good. Work rate is fantastic. And obviously, sort of his physical size just stick his legs in pretty much everywhere and win the ball, and he can recover really nicely as well. So I think long term, I could see him getting a lot of League Cup minutes, a lot of possibly Europa League minutes. I could see him forcing his way into the team in due course. So he's one I would say to keep an eye on. Is there anyone else you think that could bring a surprise in midfield for us? Maybe Mason Mount. We've barely seen him play since he signed.
That's a good one. No, not in midfield. I would throw a shout out for I think left centre back. I think Kukoni. I think that's how you pronounce it. I think we've seen him in the academy. I think it will take a few years, but I think long term he could be an option. And I think also Mantato at right wing back as well. Bentito Mantato we've seen in the academy as well. But again, these are 16, 17-year-old players. But that's just for the future. A couple of players to watch out for because it's important to note that, as you said, the academy prospects that Amarin's brought through, Gonzalo Ignacio, Diamonde, and Catamo, particularly the first two, Diamonde and Ignacio, have been major, major cogs in that Sporting team for a long, long time, and they all came through the academy. And Catamo as well has come in now at right wing back. So I think you've got a great shout there, and I think we could see one or two surprises. Obviously, maybe not immediately, but within the next 12 to 18 months come through.
Yes, and then finally to finish off the expected team that we're going to see, what would you go with for your top three? I think obviously in terms of the profile of the team at Sporting, striker generally tends to be focused on running forwards, running in behind rather than coming towards play, which probably suits Rasmus Højlund and possibly one or two of our other players. So who would you put in the central one?
Yeah, I think I'd have. I think Højlund and Rashford are probably two of our better options there.
For sure. What about on the sides?
I would personally go with. I think there's three players that I think would be very good there. I think Mason Mount, or Bruno Fernandes or Ahmad. So I think the first choice two will probably be Bruno and Ahmad. I think Bruno probably on the left and Ahmad on the right. I'd probably
Yes.
say.
So I completely agree with you on Ahmad. I think he's the one that's really going to take off under Amorim. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't. The left side, I really don't know, because I think one of the biggest challenges that we'll find in the Premier League, and Ten Hag had this issue, is that when you keep trying to bait the press, teams just start to drop off and don't press you, and then you're attacking a deep block. The problem that we'd have in that situation, which is something that happened all the time on the Sporting, is that these guys, the wider players of that front three, the sort of tens, if you like, end up receiving the ball in tight spaces a hell of a lot. Ahmad's fine at doing that, no problem getting on the half turn. Bruno can be really, really scrappy and sort of sloppy in those situations. I don't think he's the best in those spaces. And I think actually sometimes the best thing for Bruno is to be receiving the ball in a lot of space, so he can just look up and just play the furthest pass he sees. And I wonder if it almost takes away some of his game by putting him in that front three. And obviously you lose potentially the penetration of like a Garnacho or a Rashford on that side. So yeah, I think that one I'm not so sure of. What do you think to that?
No, that's a good point. And I think it's also important to note, like we said before, when they're building play, these number 10s often receive back to goal as well. And I think Ahmad, I can't believe some of the things I see with Ahmad, how strong he is and how good he is in the air. For his size, is unbelievable. And I think even when he comes up against 6'2", 3 centre backs, he wins a header or he holds them off. So I think Ahmad will be great there. But I think Bruno struggles back to goal a little bit. Rashford struggles back to goal. So that's another thing I worry with. But it's also important to note that Amorim hasn't always favoured the two sort of 10s coming towards and the 9 going behind. He's also had a period where the 9 has come short with the 10s or inside forwards going behind. So we could even see somebody like, he hasn't started very well at all at Manchester United, but somebody of the profile of Joshua Zirkzee who can drop in, receive and feed the likes of Rashford, Hoyle and Garnacho. So that might be the way Amorim might also see that as an option. He might sort of invert the roles of those forward players. But I certainly agree with you on the issues there with tight spaces, and this is something that we've struggled with for a long time. But I think if there's one man, if he can stay fit, that's fantastic in those tight spaces. Mason Mount is brilliant at sort of getting to the ball first, winning free kicks, playing on the half turn. So let's hope he can stay fit.
Yes, excited for Mason Mount, hopefully to come alive in this system if he can sort of play more than 1 or 2 games before he has his next problem. But yeah, we'll see on that one. So just to finish off then, quickly in terms of the out of possession stuff, generally what we'd expect to see, I think, is probably it dropping back into a sort of a 5-2, and then if we've got Bruno up there, a 5-2-3 generally will be sort of the primary one, and sort of I think the focus of the front three in particular, or the front three and the midfield too, really is to prevent anything being played through the centre, try and force play wide to either side, then just go jump and collapse on that team as soon as the play goes down the side. But obviously in the Manchester City game, a tweak was made by Sporting at half-time because they were struggling to deal with the 8s in the pockets in the first half. So what kept happening was, let me draw this out. So City kept sort of outnumber it, sort of overloading the sides down here, and obviously that's either side of the midfield pivot. So the Sporting pivot would go across one side with one of them covering whichever man was on the ball side, one of them staying central. But then it meant if City switched the play quickly, the guy on this side was free in loads of space. So how did Amorim adapt that at half time? And is that something you might expect to see a little bit more in the Premier League?
No, that's a great point. And I was actually tweeted at halftime saying that these overloads there, I'm a bit worried about this, but at halftime, all he did, he brought Pedro Gonzalez, or in this case, Bruno Fernandes, back, and they just changed to sort of a 5-3-2 out of possession. And it just worked a lot better. And this is what I love about a back three, when you've got these sort of inside forwards behind a striker. And this is why, if one of those inside forwards is a number 8 or a number 10, traditionally, this offers you so much flexibility, because you can have somebody like Bruno Fernandes or Mason Mount defending, pushing back in to make a midfield 3. Even during a game, you might say, Cobby or Agate might say, hang on, Bruno, let's get back in here. We need a bit of help in here. There's loads of box midfields in the Premier League, lots of inverted fullbacks, centre-backs going into midfield. There's a load of overloads in central areas. We see it all the time. So having a player that is generally comfortable at playing in midfield as one of those inside forwards is fantastic because you can just pull them back. And also Ahmad, if he does play as well, Ahmad is actually quite astute positionally as well at a possession, and he tends to understand sort of when to press and his positioning quite well. So I think those two players are really, really important in terms of their understanding of triggers. We've seen a lot sort of when the opposition's building up and they play a backwards pass, which is obviously quite an obvious trigger, or a pass to the wider centre back, sort of then Trincao sort of goes and presses. So those players are vitally important, and we've seen with United, we just don't have enough smart players sort of out of possession. So that's something we're going to have to look out for and certainly improve.
Yeah, for sure. And I think in general, this system is one that's worked incredibly well. The sort of base 5-2-3, as it were, or sort of 3-4-3. Obviously, Xabi Alonso's Leverkusen team also used that out of possession and were absolutely brilliant. So difficult to play against. And the main thing, as with defending in any system, is just compactness. As long as you can get the back line and the front line really close together, and the midfielders somewhere in between the two of them, you're in a good position to defend fairly well. And obviously the key points to that are just having athletic players who can read the game and defend fairly well across the pitch. So in that sense, not anything particularly unexpected, but this system can give us a lot of flexibility. And because obviously you've got that back five in there, it is a little bit more secure than the back four and probably a little bit less prone to a big switch of play at times as well. So the final thing I want to touch on today is for people watching who are saying, okay, that's a lot of interesting stuff that we've had to say about Amorim, hopefully, or maybe people think it was all a load of waffle, or they're half asleep by now. Who knows? One thing I want to leave people with is what can we expect, and you touched on this a little bit earlier, what can we expect things to look like when United have the ball? So we'll take the most obvious, the most basic situation of a goal kick here. Talk me through, what can we expect from United in this situation? What might it look like?
Yeah, so what we might see is sort of Luke Shaw and Yoro sort of dropping back slightly, sort of on either side of the edge of the box, and then sort of it'd be interesting to see which one, but one midfield player drops in alongside Martinez, and then one of the inside forwards will drop as well into the half space, and then the other, so Agati will drop into the other half space. So I think it'd be more Agati instead of Mainu receiving deeper, but I think we touched upon this actually in one of our games where, do you remember when Kobbie Mainu was pushed forward in build-up and he was used sort of as that outlet in the half space, and I think we had a fullback going into midfield. I think Dallo and Mainu switched for a game.
Yes, it was a Liverpool game.
They switched and it actually worked pretty well. And I think something that could be quite interesting to see is if we do go with this build-up, we could see sort of Kobbie start trying to play into Kobbie and then using Kobbie's, because what people don't realise is how good Kobbie is in the final third. We haven't seen it. We've seen it in glimpses. We've seen like his skill against Liverpool, his goal against Liverpool. We've seen his goal in the FA Cup final. But we haven't seen, people don't know that Kobbie could probably get you, 10, 12 goals in the Premier League a season, because he's fantastic in the final third. So I think if we can get Kobbie a little bit further forward, playing in the half space, using his carrying, getting the team up the pitch, and also providing the final ball, which he's really good at, I think that could be something interesting. But we've seen like a 3-2 build up as well. We've seen a lot of different variations. So I think the most important thing initially is just to see how those sort of, rather than the shapes, really what the intentions are behind those shapes.
So it sounds like the most interesting and the most obvious thing to look out for in Amorim's first game this Sunday will be the centre-back going into midfield. So in this case, that's Martinez stepping into midfield and possibly receiving back to goal alongside Kobbie Mainu. But that's the number one thing that we take a look out for the start of Ruben Amorim's tenure. You might also see quite a bit of Bruno Fernandes or Ahmad dropping in deep to try and receive. But those are sort of the... Oh, that was shit. I'll do that again. I overthought that massively, right? Let me erase the thing. So, interesting stuff there from Charlie. And as you've said, I think the most interesting thing and most important thing to look for this weekend, the most obvious bit to show that we're an Amorim team, will be the central centre-back stepping into midfield to stay in this double pivot on goal kicks. You might also see the players off the front line dropping in to try and receive, to create a sort of midfield box. And overall, I think the most important thing for Amorim is his first game away at Ipswich. It's a game that in pretty much every situation, Manchester United need to be winning. So ultimately, that's Amorim's first test, and fingers crossed he gets off to a flying start. Thank you so much for watching the Tactical View. It was brilliant to be back alongside Charlie to bring it to you. Let us know what you thought in the comments down below, and we'll see you again soon.